Hello, and welcome to Replay Value. There is some kind of twisted irony that the very thing that sank Time Paradox Ghostwriter can be found in its first chapter, with a manga editor ripping a storyboard to shreds. It's not like any one part of it is especially bad. The problem is that nothing about it is good. Pacing, characters, plot. Yeah, the whole thing turned out pretty mediocre. Well, except for the premise, which is the whole reason why I'm here after all. Because I wouldn't have bothered if I hadn't found the premise, or at least the concepts that seem to spill naturally out of said premise, interesting. Time Paradox Ghostwriter opens with Teppei Sasaki, an aspiring mangaka whose dream is to publish a manga that everyone in the world will love. And he's such a good guy that he'll help a kid get a balloon out of a tree, even at the risk of bodily harm, before his big meeting with the aforementioned editor. As I alluded to earlier, that meeting doesn't go very well, but Sasaki is so devoted to his dream that he pulls an all-nighter to create a new one-shot from scratch, which is then also dismissed the following day. Sasaki is about to say those fateful words, "I quit," despite all of the time and effort poured into his passion, when lightning strikes his apartment, fusing Mirai the robot figure, his microwave, and his fridge together. And after a ding echoes from the microwave, out pops a copy of Shonen Jump from 10 years in the future, featuring a brand new series by Itsuki Aino. Reading the one-shot nearly brings him to tears and impresses Sasaki so much that he yells into the sky about its greatness. That series, White Knight, seemingly reinvigorates our protagonist, which makes it shocking when that future copy of Jump disappears, as if it was all just a dream. Inspired by that vision conjured from his stress-addled brain, he recreates White Knight, pulling another all-nighter, trespasses his way onto the Shonen Jump editorial floor, gets the editor-in-chief's approval to be in the mag with his one-shot, and thus secures his debut, passing out with a smile on his face. But as our first chapter ends, we see new future editions of Jump falling slowly out of the microwave, and a young girl asking, "Why is my White Knight in Shonen Jump?" And the ominous yet always exciting words, "to be continued." And after that first chapter, I was ecstatic to see where Time Paradox Ghostwriter could go. But 13 chapters later, and the series has come to an end, in all likelihood axed by Jump's editorial staff. And there are plenty of reasons for that. A lot of people will point to the fact that the protagonist is a plagiarist and say, that's that, in regard to the negative reception. But I think even if that aspect of the story was received better, this series would still be dead as a doornail because it fundamentally never decided what story it wanted to be. To quote the comment the editor makes on that second failed storyboard, "This story is completely empty. There's nothing in it at all." It gestures in the direction of interesting ideas and themes, it alludes to engaging concepts for its plotline and characters, and does nothing with it. To that end, I'd like to talk about the major missteps the series takes between bad planning and uncertain direction, and the Time Paradox Ghostwriter we could have gotten. And if you'd like to read the series before we continue, head into the description where you can find a link to the official English translation. I think the first really apparent flaw with this series is that it has bad planning. The first chapter is great, but what immediately follows, in my opinion, confuses the story to a degree where after the third chapter of the series, I wasn't entirely sure where we were going from there. And not in a good way where the possibilities are endless, there simply was no clear emotional through line to make me excited for whatever was in store. In Chapter 2, Sasaki learns that his microwave really is a time machine, shoutouts to Steins Gate, and actively decides to keep using the alternate timeline jump to produce White Knight in our reality, going full freight on the plagiarism after convincing himself that he now has a duty to bring it into this world. In Chapter 3, Itsuki Aino, the mangaka who actually writes White Knight 10 years in the future, approaches Sasaki revealing that she'd already started working on that very concept. But after a conversation wherein we learn that they're two of a kind regarding their dreams and philosophies, Itsuki declares that she'll produce a manga that's infinitely better than White Knight, and that she's leaving White Knight in Sasaki's hands. We will come back to this panel and that conversation, cause whoo boy, there is a lot to unpack there in regard to the plagiarism and thematic aspects of the series. But at the end of the third chapter, even the manga seems like it's unsure of what's next. It just alludes to the fact that it's time to draw White Knight, and great. but who cares? Whereas other series like The Promised Neverland are busy heightening their conflicts as established in Chapter 1, Time Paradox Ghostwriter is wrapping up possible threads. Aino has freed Sasaki of any interpersonal conflict with her actions in Chapter 3. There's no lingering thread of her calling him out for plagiarizing, not that she thinks he plagiarized because time travel, and in fact goes the extra mile to assuage his concerns even if he hadn't already decided in Chapter 2 that he has to continue the work, thus minimizing the internal moral conflict of plagiarizing. Another problem that presents itself at this moment is lack of a clear motivation. And I think that's especially a problem given the magazine that Time Paradox Ghostwriter was in. When I think of Shonen Jump heroes, I think of very clear character goals. Deku, number 1 hero, Hinata, Little Giant, Emma, Survive, Naruto, Hokage, and on, and on, and on, and on. That's not to say that they don't have other goals, or that those overarching goals might be sidelined or evolve over time, but that in this principal desire, we are able to learn about the characters, figure out what their motivations are. We get their backstory, we get their reasons for why they're pursuing the goal, we get insight into their personality and character. We have a lens by which to understand their perspective. Motivations don't have to be grand either. It can be as simple as being inspired by someone and thinking it looks cool. Shoutouts to Haikyuu. And I'd be willing to bet your favorite villain has a motivation that explains their viewpoint in a way that even if you disagree with it, it's understandable how they arrived at their conclusions and their goals. Sasaki has no clear motivation. He's a good guy, but his reasons for wanting to create manga are unclear. We're just told he wants to do it. So his whole desire to create a story that anyone can enjoy, despite the fact that he's empty inside, feels in and of itself hollow. He wants to create manga simply because that's his character. There's nothing he's attempting to prove by telling a story, even though he's not quote-unquote unique. That's just his dream. He has a goal and a shallow backstory, but no motivation that links those two things together. And because we don't have that motivation, what's the driving force behind the story at the end of Chapter 3? What is the thing that we have to know by picking up the next chapter? For me, there is none. Just vague hope of what could follow afterwards. And thus begins the part where Time Paradox Ghostwriter throws things at the wall to see what sticks. First, it tries character drama with 2 chapters of Sasaki's self-doubt while adapting White Knight, trying to live up to the incredibly high bar set by the real release. The core problem here is the disconnect between our main character and the audience in regard to that self-doubt. We're not shown how Sasaki's version is worse than Itsuki's. The story is the same, so it's an art problem, but there's no comparison of the two's art styles. There's a lack of technical expertise here which feels inconsistent with the main character's position as a mangaka. Now listen, writers don't always have expertise on every subject they write about, but sometimes their characters should have that expertise. I'm not a mechanic, but it'd be weird if a character I wrote who did maintenance for a Formula 1 team couldn't explain why one kind of engine was better or different than another. It is similarly weird to be looking at a story from the perspective of the main character who is a mangaka and have that character principally be concerned about the art not looking good while getting no explanation as to why it's failing to live up, especially when that's the critical issue for 2 chapters, and doubly so when there's an artist drawing the manga who's available to be consulted about these very things. Despite the fact that Sasaki is our vehicle for the story, and we're privy to his thoughts, the story simply states the fact that the art is worse, as though art criticism is so binary. You might argue that this is secondary to the larger character point about Sasaki needing to make White Knight his own, as confirmed by Itsuki in Chapter 5, but I would argue that it's impossible for the audience to intuit that takeaway without being able to see the difference in the art evolve over the 3 drafts and comparing it to the original. We're just told that he made it his own in the final draft. And all of that doesn't help with making the world or story feel real because our main character, who is supposedly a very talented manga artist in his own right, doesn't have the vocabulary or expertise to explain his shortcomings, whether real or imagined. The next element introduced, Itsuki's death in the future, is not played for thriller or mystery, but instead as a way to create a battle manga with manga as the battlefield. Sasaki's version of White Knight, now fully under his direction thanks to no new chapters from the future, versus present Itsuki's brand new series with skills she's picked up from working with Sasaki's team over the last year in Anima. And honestly, this was kind of what I was hoping for from the moment that Itsuki said that she was going to make a manga better than White Knight. Hell, it even provides our main character with a new overarching goal, to save the girl whose genius unwittingly gave him the opportunity to achieve his dream. But it runs into a similar issue as the previous discussion. There's never any discussion of the two manga series themselves. Itsuki's is better without talking about why, just vague allusions to drops in quality on Sasaki's end. We can be told that someone is better at something than someone else, off-screen. But it would be crazy to do that if that story is about basketball and all of the matches are played off-screen. Though, in fairness, the end was almost certainly coming by this point in the story. And in a similar vein, I want to credit Time Paradox Ghostwriter with how meta it gets in Chapter 12. I happen to love that this conversation between Sasaki and ostensibly the author of the manga takes place on a book frozen in time, where our protagonist basically has to tell his creator, or his stand-in, that it'd be better to give a certain type of closure than uncompromising the vision and leaving it incomplete. Special shoutouts to the black hole that at the perfect moments looks like the pupil of an eye, as though we're also welcome spectators of this conversation, or that there's an even higher power looking down on the discussion, maybe an editor-in-chief. I think it's worth noting that I dislike the actual conclusion of the story, but it so obviously didn't get to go out on the terms it wanted, with so much of the secondary cast being cast aside and several of the plot mysteries going unanswered, that I'm frankly amazed it ended with any semblance of closure, so I don't want to raise it all that much. I will say that ending the character arc of, I want to make manga that everyone will enjoy, with, as long as someone out there gets it, is a fitting end for a manga that got axed, even if it feels like that was as far from the initial direction as possible. Hello? Is this thing working? Sorry, I come from the far-off future of January 2021 when this video is actually published instead of August of 2020 when I originally wrote and recorded this thing. Since then, Time Paradox Ghostwriter got an extended epilogue which does a much better job of thematically concluding the series, where it develops out that shift in Sasaki's character and ends on a satisfying note instead of a sudden one. The fact that I don't mention the epilogue in the previous discussion regarding those themes, or in the upcoming one where I talk about the fixes, is the cause for that. Anyway, sorry for the time break, let's jump back in. The main reason why I got interested in Time Paradox Ghostwriter, though, is because of what I envisioned the thematic conflict would be. And I'm not slighting it for not being what I hoped, but frankly it is how I would fix the series, which is hard without touching the plagiarism aspect. We as consumers tend to lionize products that we view as not corporate, that somehow by being designed for mass consumption or being popular, they are less worthy of our attention or interest, as opposed to the value they actually hold regardless of the intent of the creator or creators. That's well represented by Sasaki in this story. He's someone who just wants to make something that'll appeal to as many people as possible, to tell a story that everyone will enjoy. And yet all of the advice he gets is to make something that's personal, that only he can tell. Hell, even his editor says that a niche is better than generic broad appeal. Meanwhile, you could have the foil in present Itsuki as the total auteur/genius who's absolutely only trying to tell her story with no care as to who will enjoy it, currently unable to get published despite our knowledge that she's capable of total greatness. So when Sasaki gets the future one-shot, and only the one-shot, no more future chapters, at least not initially, and is then pressed into creating a series based off of it, he enlists Itsuki to help him write her future series, where the two represent opposites ideals of a supposed spectrum of creative intentions, and they clash and argue over what the vision of the story should be and what the best way to tell it is. And that enable our thematic conflict to show, over the course of the series, that the collaborative process of creation improves the work, and that it's not limited to just the creators themselves, but the influences of their assistants, editors, friends, family, hell, even the random people we meet on the street when we help fix their ice cream and stop time. It would challenge this really limited binary thinking of mass appeal versus personal projects, and that one is inherently better than the other simply because of its intended reach. And you could easily incorporate the battle manga concept in there, split them up for new one-shots, have them compete over storyboards for new chapters. It'd be a manga about trying to adapt a story based on the bits and pieces left behind by the future creator and the puzzle of putting it together with the occasional new chapter that does wind up popping out through the microwave. Some mystery elements, trying to figure out what events happened in the future to inspire certain moments, the interpersonal drama that Itsuki finding out about the microwave would cause, the moral inquiry into Sasaki, who realistically couldn't be so lawful good on the introduction, as what's the deal with this guy who would plagiarize a story because of his desperation? There's so much to be done with this premise. It's just a shame to me that after the first chapter, Time Paradox Ghostwriter never found its footing and became subject to the very criticism it outlined in its first chapter. It's not like any one part of it is especially bad. The problem is that nothing about it is good.